Okay, we are live. Welcome if you're joining in right away. Hello to everybody. We're just going to give everybody a few minutes to log in and let us know you're here. Just hang out for a second. We usually have people from all over the world. Hello, I see 6 people have logged in. We're going to give people just a few moments to log in, tell us your name, and tell us which agency you're from in the comments, please. And of course, this is going to be an interactive session, so you're welcome to start writing questions at any time. Oh, hey, Jennifer. Hey, Blake. Hello, Jessica. Glad you're here. And who else? And Sarah. Oh, Kennedy Shores. I don't know that one. So this is great. Just to remind people, we use a different format than Facebook Live, and we project into Facebook Live. So if you put your name and the agency you're from, then we can see who you are. Brett, do you see that coming through on yours?
I don't. I see a blank screen. I'm glad we're not going to be lonely.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you. And I will also keep watch for comments, and so we can ask questions. I'm just waiting for people. Shows 16 people. So as you're logging in, please write your name and the agency you're from in the comments, just so Brett and I know who's here. It makes it easier for us to be able to address everything we need to. I'm just waiting for it. We'll start in just a minute, everybody. There we go. Okay, good. Now I have it on face. Oh, hey, Teresa. Glad you're here. Teresa from MedStar. Let's see. Now I can see it on my phone. Okay, so we've got Ariel. She is from New Orleans. Nancy Lockhart. We know Nancy. Natasha Cameron from Parkland. So she's from Alberta. They are in Alberta. Jordan is Ventura County, so that's California. Jill Marie Livingston, triple A's. Kim from Montgomery County. They are a double. Guion in Blainville, Quebec. Excellent. That's I won't say it because I'll hurt someone. You were probably there. It's the one. Brett, did you go to Blainville when you were visiting?
Yes.
Guillaume's agency.
Yes.
Bill Marie, she is from Région Santé. Welcome. Jean and Veronica, they're both from Northwell in Syosset, New York. Patty is probably sitting with. Oops, sorry, my screen is going away. Probably sitting in the same room at MedStar. Who else do we have? Paula Cott in Greensboro, North Carolina. Adam Gaines, of course. Double A's from Chatham. Linda Sapp. Linda's in Florida, and she's one of our implementers. And Kelly's in Houston, in Texas. Excellent. Okay, welcome everybody. So this is a Facebook Live where we have a very special guest. And so, first of all, my name is Kim Rigdon. I'm the Associate Director of Accreditation. And you see me every once in a while doing a Facebook Live over here on True to Q. And there's also a Facebook Live every Wednesday on Race to ACE that covers all manner of things accreditation. So if you have any desire to know about anything to do with accreditation at all, you're very welcome to ask for access to that private Facebook site. And today we are incredibly excited to have Brett Patterson joining with us. So Brett, I'm going to let you tell everybody who you are and what you do for the Academy.
Okay. Brett Patterson. I'm the chair of the Medical Council of Standards. I do a number of things, but if I had to boil it all down to what I do the most of and what I like the most is protocol content and evolution. I started working with the MPDS back in 1987. And I think that's actually relevant to today's conversation because of how, not only how the protocol has evolved, but how Q has evolved. And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. I want to talk a little bit about what the intent of the protocol is, specifically with regard to the chief complaint selection rules.
Yes. And thank you so much. And if people have not seen the article that Brett wrote exactly on this, it is linked in Facebook. I think there's 2 different posts that link the article that was presented in the journal. So if you haven't read it, do read it. If you have read it and have questions, post them. So 1987. So Brett, I was thinking about this, and I tried to find evidence. Do you know how long you and I have known each other? Do you have any idea?
No, I don't.
I couldn't, because I remember bothering you a ton when I was at Toronto Paramedic Services with questions. I kind of did an email search, and the first email I could find that with you and I was 2009.
Oh,
so
wow.
10 years.
Yeah, wow, cool.
And it's very interesting you say the protocol evolution. I know my understanding of things have definitely changed, and specifically with one of the big issues we're going to talk about today. I'm so pleased you wrote this article because it was one of the things that I had confusion on. Let's catch up. We've got more people. Caitlin Haynes, and she's Lamar County, excellent. They're in Mississippi. Terry Pagenkop, Ron Sewell, he is in Lee County in Florida. And Jody Mader, Jody's in Kansas, and I think sending in an ACE application soon. Oh, now we're international, Brett. We have James Gummett in London. And Terry is, I made a mistake. She's not implementation. She works for CPR, formerly National Q. Everybody's welcome. As we talk, post questions. But first of all, I am going to ask Brett some questions because I realize many people may know Brett Patterson by name and reading his articles, but not know him or anything about him. So we're just going to ask some general questions, and you just give me whatever your first answer is. Okay, Brett?
Okay.
Preference, jazz or blues?
Blues. Although they're very intertwined, so that's a tough question.
I know it was a tricky question. Favorite sport to watch?
Probably hockey, especially right now.
Like NHL hockey or?
Yeah, NHL hockey. So everybody should know that I'm sitting right now in Tampa Bay, Florida, and that would give you a clue why I'm enjoying hockey so much right now.
Yeah. Me, I'm a Canucks girl, not so much. They're like 50-50 for wins and losses, so pretty bad. Okay. If you had to eat one meal every day for the rest of your life, what would it be?
That would be a close tie between a hamburger and some fried chicken.
Okay. As long as it's like excellent fried chicken.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What book are you reading right now?
I'm just finishing up a autobiography by Greg Allman. I read a story of the Allman brothers, and then I wanted to kind of see his side of the story, so I just finished that. I'm almost always, though, kind of a historical nonfiction kind of. I don't read novels typically.
Okay, perfect. One more question. What is the biggest myth or misconception in EMD right now, do you think?
Wow. Probably that EMDs are robots. That we don't need to think that somehow we can automate this process. And I don't think anything is further from the truth. Although we may use technology to help us do our jobs, I don't think that anytime soon we'll be having someone press 1 if they're choking, so to speak. That's not going to happen. Yeah. We think, and I think that's relative to our discussion today.
It totally is, and you addressed it in your article. I love that because that was actually, I wrote down 3 things, and that was the third, was EMTs had to turn their brains off and follow a bouncing ball, so that's perfect. One that's come up on True to Q that also is something that we can talk about in your article is a misconception that trauma trumps medical when you're choosing a chief complaint.
Right. I think that's probably easier to understand than people think. I was thinking of an example about that when I read that somewhere, or somebody made a comment about that trauma. Yeah. I'm glad you dispelled the myth that trauma trumps medical. think about it this way. What if you had, and this happens all the time, you have a patient suffers a cardiac arrest and takes a fall. The first thing the caller says is, my husband fell. I can't wake him up. You better not be going to the fall protocol for that. I mean, that's a clear-cut example, but it makes sense. I think I wrote about the actual example in the article is a lady who was very ill, a cancer patient who was very ill. And on her way to the sofa, she scraped her leg on the coffee table. So she's got a traumatic incident there. And the Q, believe it or not, told the EMD they should have gone to protocol 21 rather than for this very sick. That wasn't the chief complaint at all. So hope we can dispel that myth.
Yes. And you mentioned something there that I think is kind of part and parcel with this myth, but can bleed out of it. And it was in your article too. The name of the protocol or the issue in the protocol must be something that the caller said. So, because she announced that she scraped her leg on the coffee table, that's what the caller is saying. So that's what we have to go with.
So that's the kind of mistake that artificial intelligence might make. If it's just listening to keywords and nothing else, if it's not putting the caller's words or the chief complaint description, if it's not rounding that, listening to it as a human being, and then coming up with a chief complaint, which is the EMD's job, not the caller's job, then we're not doing our jobs. Artificial intelligence might be able to hear cut in there or bleed or whatever, and then read some rule that says if trauma is involved, you have to go to a trauma protocol. Whereas we're free to think about what they've said and then come up with a chief complaint rationally.
That makes sense. I'm just going to, we have had a few more people join. I want to make sure that everyone is hearing both Brett and hearing me okay. So if you can give us some thumbs up just to let us know the volume's okay, or thumbs down if it's not. And we'll say hello to Jocelyn, who's here from El Paso. Tell her, so she's in Colorado. Ginger's in Reno. Susie Marsan is watching, Brett. And we have Tara from Snohomish County, that's in Washington. Marnie is Ventura County, so there's a couple people from Ventura. Monica, San Jose, so a lot of California representative. And Luis Garcia, he's in Miami-Dade, so he's in Florida. And Ray, well, he's in Florida, and Jessica. So welcome, everybody. We're going to talk about the article that Brett Patterson wrote in the journal. It is in, I think, the February journal. It's available online. The link is in the comment section. I posted it. It's Art and Science, How a Complaint Description Becomes a Chief Complaint. So we're going to be talking about this, and you are very welcome to post questions anytime through, and we'll ask them of Brett. Now, in this article, I want to delve into it a bit, because I think, and we've seen posts on this in the discussions beforehand, Brett, that minds are going to be blown by the premise that you posit in this article. So I want to dive in and read. Really, it's a summary. It's the end of the article. So on page 38, what you wrote, and then maybe you could expand on this if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so you said, and I want to tell everybody that we are speaking specifically of medical protocol. Brett is the expert in medical protocol. I think there are many parts of our discussion that could be extrapolated out into the other protocols, because you'll see as soon as I read this, it's about how we are listening to the caller and how we're taking in and interpreting the information that they give us. Okay, so EMD's ability to understand why the call is being made, which literally means listening to the complaint description, clarifying as necessary, and determining exactly what happened. A complete complaint description must always be required to contain enough information to generate an accurate chief complaint. Understand that the actual chief complaint may or may not literally align with the complaint description. The art of this process is knowing just how much information is needed to correctly synthesize it. So can you unpack that a bit more, why you needed to write that, and what you want us to do?
Well, I think we all intuitively understand, and I think any of us that are clinicians understand that the patient themselves doesn't always know what the diagnosis is, or if you put it that way, or what's really clinically most important.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, the fall is a great example. They see the fall and the person's unconscious, and they're more concerned about the fall or moving the patient and hurting the patient, and they just don't understand clinically what's happening. So I think we need to understand what happened in order to synthesize that in our own minds. When we know, I think oftentimes we jump to looking for a chief complaint protocol before we really understand what's happening. We're listening to those key words, trying to figure out where do I go next so that I don't have a pregnant pause here in searching for my chief complaint protocol. And there are really three distinct steps. There's first listening to that complete description. And we kind of went over that quickly, clarifying, but that really, really does need to be done. So we know why they're calling. And then we formulate a chief complaint in our minds as EMDs. And then finally, we look at what we have available in our protocols and choose the best protocol to address that chief complaint, understanding that there's literally millions of different sorts of complaints. The variance is tremendous, and we have to boil that down to just a finite number of protocols and what we're going to select.
So what does the emergency medical dispatcher need to be listening for? What are they trying to pull out of the air?
If you had to boil that down to one thing, it's why they call an emergency number for an ambulance.
Yeah, understanding why the call is being made. So they may have to clarify, as you say.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, oftentimes they don't appreciate the depth that you need at that point in the call.
Right.
They're thinking, send me an ambulance.
Right.
And they're not really understanding that they could be much better served if they provide a good description. And oftentimes they do. I think we miss that. If you listen to calls, you realize that a lot of times they do provide a very good description. It's the ones that they don't that we tend to remember, and that's where we get our questions, right? It's the ones that the EMD doesn't really understand, and they reach out to us, and those are the ones that we tend to remember, not the routine.
And we have the chief complaint rules are there, and they're located for everybody. They're on the additional information of case entry, but they're also sometimes spiced through the actual chief complaints. So it's really, when we're talking about you can't be robotic, it takes a lot of knowledge to be a really good emergency dispatcher. You have to know all those things and be running them through your head as you're listening to what the caller is saying, don't you, to see what fits?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we don't give EMDs the credit they deserve. I certainly do. I see them all over the world, and they're just amazing. The kind of jobs they do is amazing. Besides all the multitasking ability, they know the protocol extremely well. And that's evidenced by, I think our last round at the Standards Council, we had 500 PFCs. And these are written by EMDs that really know their protocols well. So, we need to appreciate that. We need to understand that they really do think. We really think. And we should be able to take in that chief complaint description and make some decisions about it without looking for single words and looking at a single rule to send us to one place and nothing else.
Right. So in the article, you have an interesting name for kind of what you've identified as the cause, or what are the possible causes of us selecting the wrong chief complaint. So you call it the trigger finger. Can you talk about what trigger finger is on a call?
Well, I think that's just trying to get into a protocol quickly so the EMD is listening to keywords. And I can't think of anywhere that happens more than with fall. And it's very tragic with fall. If you look at the determinate descriptors in the protocol, we know what the percent of cardiac arrest is in every single code in the protocol. And the ground level fall unconscious patient has an extremely high number of cardiac arrests in it. And it makes perfect sense. The caller's seeing the fall, but the patient's in cardiac arrest. But you hear the word fall, and that's why you're going to the protocol. You're not listening to the chief complaint description. If someone was normal a moment ago, and then they had a ground level fall, and now they're not responsive, that's a cardiac arrest scenario. That is not a fall scenario. So we need to listen to that entire scenario. Why is it they're calling, exactly what happened, and then make a decision based on that, and not a keyword.
Yeah, and that's when in the article, that's exactly that EMD's tendency to select a chief complaint based on a keyword instead of all those, I think, three things: understanding why the call is being made, clarifying as necessary, and using all of your knowledge to select the best chief complaint. Why do you think that we as EMDs make this error, this trigger finger error?
I think it's because of we, the Qs. It's why it has happened. And that's a real separate evolution. You asked if I remembered how long I've known you, and that's so we go back 10 years. Susie Marsan's on the call. We go back to probably the same EMD class in 1987.
Oh, wow.
And there wasn't any such thing with the academy as quality assurance at that time, and probably nearly the first 10 years. But back in Pinellas, we recognized that there was a need for that call review process, and we came up with our own. It was done in an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, yeah.
But I just don't remember having the same issues with Q as what we've evolved to today. And part of that might actually be my fault as one of the originators of the chief complaint selection rules. We thought chief complaint selection rules would be a great sort of framework to help guide EMDs to pick the most appropriate chief complaint. And they make tremendous sense in some situations.
Yeah.
If you have a patient with belly pain and chest pain, we're going to use the chest pain protocol, and that's written in rule, right? That's a priority symptom. Makes perfect sense. But we've lost something in translation by being so literal with those chief complaint selection rules. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that we as Qs want to be as consistent as possible.
Yeah.
If 3 Qs review the same call, we'd like them to come up with the same result. And I don't know that that's ever going to be entirely feasible because maybe there was more than one way to go with the call and other reasons. But we've gotten very strict as Qs, and we look for concrete things in protocol to tell us this way versus that way, sometimes without even thinking about what the scenario was and what's best for the patient. It's almost like what's best for the patient is out of the equation when it comes to selecting a chief complaint protocol. And EMDs know what the basic content of each protocol is. And once they understand what that chief complaint is, they've listened to the description, they understand what the chief complaint is, I think they're smart enough. I should have turned my phone off, excuse me.
Hello.
That's Brian Dale calling me.
Oh, he should know what's going on. Seriously, I can't believe he's not here.
Obviously not on Facebook right now. So, but anyway, I think I made the point. Yeah,
no, and I fully agree. And it's speaking of Brian, it's something that we talk about a lot. And we talk about it a lot on True to Q and Race to Ace. And what we keep coming back to, and I'd made a note about asking you about this too. In Q, with the 10th edition performance standards and Aqua 7, we really, really are working hard to get it back to being reasonable. Something happened between the 8th edition and the 4B, 9B performance standards where it really did, and I take full blame for this as well, it really did become not about looking at what the call taker did, but about does it perfectly match this rule? And we became really rule bound, and it was detrimental to the process because we find EMDs are unsure of what they should do. They second guess themselves. And so it's easiest to go, oh, they said fall. I can't be wrong if I choose clearly what the caller said because they don't trust themselves. And, we try to put things in too many boxes. And so now I think the same can apply to chief complaints lawyers. Like, is it reasonable? Can you understand why the call taker did what they did based on the information and giving them full carte blanche to ask more questions and clarify it and turn their brain on and figure, I always think chief complaint selection is like being a detective. You have to ask questions to uncover things. And as I was thinking about this, I have a family member who has a heart condition. And they were sitting down and they kind of they didn't look 100%. I said, hey, what's going on? And they said, oh, I'm really exhausted. I'm really tired. So I'm just going to sit here for a second. And I thought, and so I said, tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what that means to you to be exhausted. Well, sure enough, it was like, well, when I walked up the stairs, I lost my breath a little bit and I'm having trouble catching my breath now. That's different than exhausted. But had I not, and it was so funny because it was actually because I was thinking about all of this, I decided to phrase it that way and got all this extra information that I really needed to help that I didn't know. So
absolutely. I think Q has had some growing pains. I can remember, I think it was in the early 2000s when our EMD instructor population grew incredibly, exponentially. We went from probably less than 50 to about 165 instructors in a very short period of time.
Yeah, I think I was part of that wave.
And we realized at some point that we were having some quality issues with our instructors. And part of the reason was we just grew so fast because the demand was so high. And with this, we're pushing agencies toward ACE, which is an absolute, fantastic thing. The ACE population's grown tremendously. We started National Q. We're really pushing performance standards in EMD to improve quality, right? All with excellent motivation, and intent. But part of that, I think, with all that growing is, we've probably looking at some of the wrong things, and we're not quite, the Qs as well as the EMDs aren't being allowed to think as much as probably they should. And I commend the efforts of everybody involved with the Q standards, because that evolution is definitely swinging around the other way now. And there's a lot of interest in making this whole process better, and that we learn from it and we take better care of our patients.
Fantastic. Well, interesting, your point about and this is not anything negative about EMD instructors at all, because I'll give you an example from a personal example. And then I want to delve into the one issue that is, I think you really clarified in here, but causes confusion everywhere. So I know that I encountered EMDs who had been trained that if they hear any of the altered level of consciousness phrases that are listed on 26, that if they hear any of a caller ever says any of those phrases, they must go to 26 for that. And then this created kind of a delving in what's supposed to happen, and it morphed into, for me and my agency in conversations with you, and maybe not getting it exactly as it was supposed to be, is okay, so we have to figure out what's happening in case entry. We kind of did this teeter-totter the other way. If they mention anything that has anything to do with decreased level of consciousness in case entry, then you have to go to 31. So we didn't have the subtlety that you're talking about here. So I want to dig into that a bit so people really understand it. So maybe could you start with, why are those altered level of consciousness phrases on 26 in the first place?
I think that really needs to be understood. And we really can't expect all EMDs to understand the history and the evolution of altered level of consciousness. And I would point out right away, and this is important, that that list of things doesn't say decreased level of consciousness. It says altered level of consciousness. Except
in French, but we're working with that. Because I know Claude Marie is on here. She may be thinking that.
Sure. But I'm sure that in the French language, there's a distinction somewhere. We're just not saying it right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a really big difference between lethargic and semi-conscious, right? And they're both in the same group. Those are actually real life examples in there. There's an article out that I co-authored with Art Braunschweiger called The Safety Net in Protocol 26, I believe is the title.
If you have a PDF of it and send it to me, I will post it here.
Okay, that'd be great. I think people probably should read that, because once you understand where those terms come from and why they're in 26, then you won't be as confused about why you don't go there just because you hear that term, right? Okay. So Protocol 26 has some alpha level responses, 1 through, how many are there? 30 of them or something.
A lot.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them in there. And we had some folks who used the Omega protocol asking us to move more of those codes into Omega, right? And at first blush, you look at those and you think, okay, well, these don't sound like very sick people. And Dr. Clausen, as cautious as he is, I mean, he has one very important rule: no dead bodies in Omega, right? That cannot happen. We can't have a code where we can't have a high risk code in Omega. So he said, let's let's do a little research and maybe we can figure out how sick are these alpha 1 through whatever codes. And when we started listening to these calls live, specifically those codes, we had kind of a rude awakening. First of all, it became very apparent that some agencies were abusing Protocol 26. In other words, the EMDs were becoming very familiar with it, so they were going there even when it was kind of clear from the description they probably should be on another protocol. And think about it, it rules out priority symptoms. It kind of has a nice big net, and
breathing.
You could probably get by with that protocol on all medical complaints. You wouldn't be doing a very good job, but you could probably get through it, right? So it was obvious from the chief complaint that the chief complaint selection was sometimes wrong. But what was also wrong, and this happens primarily in agencies where triage is a very important thing, right? We have a lot of agencies out there that send routine. They send 1 or 2 units, red light and siren on every call. Doesn't matter what the code is. But especially internationally, and I would point to my friend James in the UK, listening today. It's very important there to triage calls because the volume is so incredibly high. And you may wait some time for an ambulance. You may wait an hour or 2 hours in queue before an ambulance is sent. So figuring out, that priority is very, very important in some places.
Right, so, down to like the just like whether it's an alpha 1 versus an alpha 7 can make a difference about who. Yeah, that's very similar to Canada as well.
Right, but an unfortunate byproduct of that kind of culture is that EMDs sometimes feel pressured to get a lower level response.
Yes,
because they know they're taxing their resources.
Yes,
right? So
true.
Right.
And that's a real weight on their shoulders. I remember experiencing that a lot.
So what are 2 conditions in the MPDS, or 2 clinical conditions that we over triage commonly? Breathing difficulties and level of consciousness.
Yeah, the 2 that are questions on there.
Many times we get the answer no to that question. Is he completely alert? Is he responding appropriately? When the paramedics get there and the patient is actually alert. Okay. It's Dr. Clausen calls it one of the holy grails of dispatch. If we could figure out this whole alert thing, and by the way, we've got a couple of really interesting studies going on about that. How can we better determine what the patient's actual level of consciousness is? So I'm kind of going around in circles a little bit here, but one of the things we realized when we were listening to these calls is that the EMD would ask this question: is he completely alert? And the caller would say something like, well, they would hesitate. And the EMD would immediately then put in the clarifier. Well, is he responding appropriately? Almost pressuring them to say yes. And they would say yes. So now the answer in protocol is yes, he's completely alert, but we've heard something prior to that, typically in case entry, that contraindicates that. That it doesn't jive with what they're telling us now.
Contradicts it.
Contradicts, right. So earlier, and that's where those list of terms come from. It comes from what they were actually saying on the phone.
So these are things that you heard from actual callers that were not a complete no, but not truly a yes to completely alert.
Exactly. And reviewing this, I mean, my first thought was, if they said he's semi-conscious on case entry, why are we asking if he's alert?
Yeah, the answer's already no.
Right. But in other cases, like if they said he's lethargic on case entry, he may still be alert and be lethargic. You may still want to ask the question, but you don't want to pressure the caller, with the clarifier. So, my thought was we just really need to educate folks here, on when you need to ask it and when you don't. And Dr. Clausen said, well, that's a pretty big task. We got a lot of EMDs out there. Why don't we create this safety net? We can at least then go back and look at, when this call is coded 26C, meaning they have mentioned we can find out how sick those patients are. Maybe they're not so sick after all. But I think what it ultimately did is create a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I think there was a confusion in the way it was taught in EMD classes. I think that was between 11.3 and 12 that change happened.
I'm not sure. I think
somewhere back there. So then anybody who was already using protocol just got an update and they were in there. And then, in absence of clear directions, you just kind of make up what you think is the best way to deal with it.
Right.
And I think that's where this huge discrepancy in the interpretation of the intent of that and how agencies were using it. And here we are.
Yeah. I think it's a logical leap to think, well, that term is I know that term is in the altered level of consciousness list on 26. Therefore, if I hear it, that's where I should be. And that it can't be further from the truth.
Right, because we want it to be simplified. And I bet some of us as Qs were guilty of making that leap as well. And, because it's nice and it's black and white and you can make another rule about it. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't take everything into account. So,
well, if I could just summarize that really quickly, why it's there. The altered level of consciousness is there as a safety net for when the caller has mentioned one of those terms prior to the key question, or even in answer to the key question, but they're telling you, yes, he's alert.
Okay.
So they've said yes to the question, but they have mentioned either during the question or previous, they've mentioned something that contradicts that. And it's in that list. So it's there to capture it. If it didn't capture it with that Charlie code, it would be in an alpha code, even though they've mentioned that term.
Okay, so it's a yes and. Yes, and in case entry, they said he's lethargic.
Yes.
Or yes, and in case entry, they said he's acting strange, something like that.
Or even during the key question, I think when isn't so important. Is he completely alert? Yes, but he's lethargic.
Oh, I understand. There's a yes, but there. Okay, good.
Yeah. Or he's lethargic. Yes. Is he alert? Yes, he is. Is he responding appropriately? Yes. So you got a yes answer, but you've got a term that we're concerned about.
Okay. I think that what some people might ask them, what happens if there's well, no, he's kind of out of it. Is that no, or is that?
Well, that Dr. Clausen would say, the attorney for the plaintiff would say, asked and answered. You've asked them a question. They told you no. Why are you asking again? And we know that sometimes the caller's not giving us a very accurate answer, but we can't make that judgment as an EMD. We have to accept that answer and work on better ways of asking the questions.
Okay. And that would be bringing, if they had an idea of how to get a clear answer to that question, using the proposal for change process to suggest something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, it would be wonderful if somebody would write a proposal for change that would give us an answer to the alert issue.
Yeah, to magically fix that.
Yeah. The difficulty breathing is another huge one. We know we have patients that aren't in real distress where they say, yes, he's having difficulty speaking between breaths. We've tried to loosen that up and give EMDs a little leeway, but you really can't do it with a second party caller. If I've got a first party caller saying they're having difficulty speaking between breaths and they're speaking in full sentences without any breaks, you probably shouldn't have to ask the question, right?
Right. It's obvious that they don't.
If you ask it and they say yes, you got to go with it. But it's obvious you probably don't have to ask it.
I think that brings it back to the thing you mentioned before about EMDs trying to, feeling responsible for the number of units they have. If you know that it's going to be, because if this happens in case entry and you know it's going to be an echo or a delta, we also have to be okay with that's the answer they gave. And so we are, ProQA is reflecting what they told us, and it harkens over to, we can't judge the caller, clarify when appropriate and vague. Yeah, but if as Dr. Clausen said, it's asked and answered, they said no, then it's no.
Yeah.
They said yes, then it's yes.
That's correct. And there are agencies that are dealing with this crisis of volume every single day. England comes to mind, but there's others. Sao Paulo, Brazil only responds to about 40% of their call volume. 60% don't even get a response because they don't have the units to do it. But a quality Q team will not make the EMD feel pressured. You select the code based on your interrogation, not on how many resources we have. But that's going to leak over somehow, some way, because they feel it. They're call takers and dispatchers, and they understand that, patients are waiting a long time to get an ambulance. So they feel that kind of pressure.
It's a very real pressure. Okay, I'm just going to see, Brett, if anybody's asked any questions. We've got Robin. She's from Cambria Ace. And Susie, we already saw. Tricia Marnie. Brandon is here as well now. And Darren Judd. And Almendra. Almendra is the person I was referring to in Quebec, actually. She's been doing some great work with looking at the translations and caught some wonderful things to help us. Richard is here. Welcome, Richard. Okay, so we have some questions before we dive deep. Oh, no, you made some great points. I'm glad to see it's clarified. His question is, how do we avoid people using altered level of consciousness buzzwords as opposed to clarifying what happened to get to the right place? I think maybe we just answered that.
Yeah, I think it's education. I mean, the cues definitely need to know why those are there and what their purpose is, because they're the ones where the boots hit the road, and they're the ones teaching individual EMDs. So I think it starts with cues. It actually starts with instructors and then with cues to be able to pass that along.
Okay. And Richard, your other question, I have it written down already. I'll ask in a bit. Lori is asking, would it be possible or practical for EMDs to screen alertness just as medics on scene do by asking? Oh, they're talking about using I guess the alertness to person, place, and thing as a further way to assess alertness.
Right. Well, sure. And there's 2 or 3 different tools that are used out in the field. And they're excellent tools when you're there with the patient, and you can make some other fundamental decisions there. The quick answer to that question is we're testing a couple of those different models right now internationally. I think Ireland, an agency in Ireland, UK, and it's too bad Jerry Overton's not on the phone with me right now, but he's sort of leading that effort. So that's a good idea, but it is problematic. I'll just give you a great example. You walk into a nursing home and there's a lady walking down the hallway. She's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and she thinks it's 1940 and you're President Hoover, or something. Right. So this lady is completely alert, but she's not at all oriented to person, place, or time. So those are difficult questions, and it's different in trauma than it is in medical. You would be concerned if someone was completely normal and now they think it's 1940 after a car accident, right? So there's a lot of variables there that we have to consider. And it's the same with difficulty breathing. We know that high respiratory rates are indicative of acuity, but that's not an absolute. So how do you devise some kind of a test without really judging the integrity of the caller? They're the one there looking at the patient. So they're difficult things to answer, but we're working very hard on them, because unless we do a better job with those 2 things, we're absolutely wasting resources. But we have to do it safely.
Perfect. Thank you. One more. So good. So you know when we'll hear any more about these studies?
Well, I can tell you the alertness study, devising the methods took almost a year, getting people to agree on the methods. They have now started. I can't give you an ETA on completion of the study, and then it would depend on, do we have something we can actually use and test in pilot programs? But I can tell you a sense of urgency is there. It's something we really want to do. We just have to do safely. Perfect.
Okay. So watch out for it, Lori. Coming at some point, we'll have more information on that. So it's a great idea you had. And Veronica, she's asked, what is the clear-cut answer for when the chief complaint contradicts the answer to a key question that the call taker asks? Oh, I'm not sure I understand that. Veronica, maybe before we dive into this, let me know if you're asking from the Q perspective or from an EMD perspective. And Michelle in the UK is asking, if the caller offers one of the altered level, I think we maybe just summarize this, Brett, because we had this question, you answered it, so I want to make sure everybody knows. If the caller offers one of the altered level of consciousness descriptors in case entry, and then on the alert question on P26, they automatically answer no to that. Oh. Well, why would you answer no? Why wouldn't you just
Well,
answer
no,
the
no,
drop down?
I think I understand. I think that's really why they're there. If the caller offers one of those things and then they say no to the alert question, that's why they're there. It's a safety net. It grabs that call, even though they said, I'm sorry, even though they said yes to alert, it catches it as a safety net.
I think hers is more a Q question, like the call taker. They say my child has a high fever and he's really lethargic. And then when they get to, is he completely alert? The call taker answers no.
Yeah. Okay.
That's like lethargic.
That's asked and answered, and you have to code that as not alert.
Good. So if they give any of those things in case entry, then it's no. It's not find the drop down word.
Well, with some of those examples, if the caller says they're lethargic on case entry, I'm asking, are they alert? Because that doesn't mean, it's not the same thing to me. It's possible to be lethargic and still be alert. I get that. Okay. If they say semi-conscious on case entry, or you're looking at the examples, I'm not, but there's some in there that you're clearly not alert if you're semi-conscious. I'm not even asking the question.
Because it's obvious. So there is almost some gray in there. They may say something in case entry, but it does need further clarification. So you ask it, is he completely alert? And there's other things like not responding, semi-conscious, that definitely indicate a decreased level of consciousness. Yes. And so it's obvious, so they can say no.
Yes. And try not to think of those things as having anything to do with chief complaint selection.
Tell me.
They're all little partial complaints. None of them is a tell me exactly what happened thing. So you need to know exactly what happened and then choose your complaint. You don't say, just because I heard lethargic, I need to consider that to be the chief complaint. That's on 26, so that's where I'm going. You need to know what that chief complaint is.
Could you talk then a little bit more, because I think this is one of the things that's really people get very confused about. Could you give us examples of when it's clearly something that should go to, what's the intent of 31? I think that's what I want to know. What is the intent of 31? What kinds of answers to, okay, tell me exactly what happens, lets you know that you should go to 31 as opposed to these other things we've been talking about where 26 is appropriate?
When the complaint is unconsciousness, fainting, or near fainting.
Okay, so completely unconscious, like they fell and now they're unconscious. That example would be 31. So if they say I fainted, or she fainted, but now she's awake, that's 31.
Mm-hmm.
What about nearly fainted?
Right, almost fainted, nearly fainted. I was purposefully being almost sarcastic there and really simplistic, because we've turned 31 into this monster.
Yes.
It was designed, if you look at the questions, it's designed for unconscious patients to take care of their airways. It's for fainting and near fainting to rule out possible cardiac issues, the kinds of questions that we're asking.
Okay.
It's not designed for decreased level of consciousness. It never was. It's for unconsciousness, fainting, and near fainting. And decreased level of consciousness, or a not alert status, is addressed all over the protocol. Think of all the protocols that have not alert codes in it. So if we took every patient that had a decreased level of consciousness and went to 31 and evaluated based on ruling out causes of unconsciousness, we'd be spinning our wheels. And I imagine there's a lot of EMDs out there that they've been told to go to 31 for any decreased level of consciousness. Now they're asking questions they're completely uncomfortable with because it doesn't fit this chief complaint at all.
Well, tell me though, why wouldn't you go there? Here's one of the big questions I get a lot, and one of the misunderstandings is this. Why wouldn't I go there? It's a priority symptom. 31 deals with the priority symptom of unconsciousness.
Because other protocols will deal with that priority symptom better.
Okay. So, and we're not talking about decreased level of consciousness. I love when you said that. 31 is an unconscious, fainting, nearly fainted protocol, not a decreased level of consciousness protocol.
Correct. And let me give you a really bold example of that. The chief complaint is he's not alert.
Mm-hmm.
First thing I'm going to find out is tell me exactly what happened. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons that patient may not be alert. If it comes down just to that the patient's not, that they're lethargic, they're not completely alert, they're kind of out of it, sick person actually deals with that better than protocol 31 does. 31 is an episodic protocol. It's for an event of unconsciousness. Patient was conscious a moment ago, now he's unconscious. He fainted. He's awake now, but he passed out, right? And that's what that deals with. Whereas there are all sorts of other protocols, from trauma to the basic sick person to allergic reaction, that deals with that priority symptom. In fact, we've made a little change, and here's kind of a sneak peek in 13.2 to that particular rule about changes in level of consciousness that hopefully will clear up some of that confusion. Instead of priority symptoms taking precedence, how about with consideration given to priority symptoms? Meaning the protocol that I'm going to go to is going to deal with that decreased level of consciousness, and it's going to fit the chief complaint better. That's where I need to be.
You have just solved or answered or ended, I don't know how many almost across the table fisticuffs between cues on a selection of a chief complaint with that sentence. Let me throw one at you, because this is what Richard had asked, and I'd written down to ask you where this fits. There is a person with clear signs of a stroke, and they have a decreased level of consciousness. They're not responding at all, and they can't talk. They're on the floor. Where do you go?
Well, I think you can answer that question just by reading the key questions on 31. You'll start to read those and think, why am I asking this? This is making no sense at all. This patient's complaint is obviously stroke. And stroke has a not alert code. It has, you're going to go deal with their airway. You're going to get a better code. You're going to test the patient, the whole gamut. So that's
brilliant. Thank you. I know I've gotten that. I've been told that was wrong. That was a 31. So everyone just hear that. If it deals with a decreased level of consciousness more appropriately on a chief complaint protocol that best describes what's going on with the patient, that is okay.
So let me just, I'm curious here. Let me ask you a question, and maybe the other cues as well. That seemed in certain situations that could be a little confusing. I think the stroke example is kind of clear, but let's look at an allergic reaction. We have someone calling who's clearly an anaphylaxis from a bee sting. They're terribly allergic to bee stings. They've got an EpiPen handy, and the patient is unconscious. That's a priority symptom. Why aren't we on protocol 31? Nobody ever asked me that because it's so obvious. They go right to protocol 2 with that, right?
Right. So, and there's a clear link to something else they're going to do because they know, oh, I can get to Epi on 2.
I know, but there's no fear of breaking a chief complaint selection rule. They're not worried about their cue in that example. Right. So why is it with fall, if we know it's cardiac arrest, nobody gives them any grief about going to protocol 9 instead of 17, even though trauma was involved? So,
well, I think that maybe I think that may be one of the things we need to take on as cues that we may have given misdirection about that.
Well, again, I think that's a product of an evolving culture. It's just become that way. It hasn't always been that way, and I don't think it always will be. I think we just need to make that curve.
And I think we are seeing, I know most people have really been able to breathe a sigh of relief that we're talking about being reasonable. And can you see why they did that? And does it make sense? People are, they're still a little bit worried about getting it wrong, but they're quite willing to embrace that part. I'm just going to scan and see. Okay, that was stroke, and that one is done. Let's see. I'm so glad all of you have posted. This is fantastic. I'm just scrolling through to see which are comments and which are questions.
Okay.
Oh, I can't look up Annex A right now on the course module. Claude Marie, maybe give me more information. We've got a hallelujah and a much better, Brett. What about, here's one. It's a little off. Oh, we got Sean here from Texas too. We got a whole bunch of Texas people here. What if the chief complaint is I'm feeling faint?
Feeling, that's their only complaint, feeling faint?
I'm sitting in the chair and I was going to get up and I'm feeling faint, so I sat back down.
That's nearly fainted, and I think that's perfectly appropriate for 31. It explores or sort of rules out some of the more serious causes of fainting or near fainting, and it's primarily looking for things like arrhythmias or inadequate output, or decreased blood pressure, that sort of thing, something that we're actually not seeing. And it codes that based on their history of cardiac problems. They're still conscious, and it looks for or watches out for airway issues, obviously. And so you're taking care of that patient until somebody can get there and be more definitive. I thought of something while you were looking at the questions there, something I probably mentioned, and it was triggered a little bit by, I think you said Marie, with an appendix or whatever. Undoubtedly, there'll be references after this talk and after the article to things that may contradict what I'm saying. And I think has something to do with some growing processes as well. There's an example of in the curriculum somewhere about that decreased level of consciousness, choosing 31 when the complaint doesn't really justify going to 31. It's an example, and it was just a misunderstanding by someone in curriculum, and it didn't I'm supposed to edit all of that, but sometimes when the output is really large, we don't get to everything. So not everything. I think the vast majority of things in print will jive with what we're talking about today, but there may be sporadic examples of things that don't seem to correlate well. And I would love to hear about them, because those are things we can fix.
Perfect.
Every few years we redo the principles book, and inevitably there's errors in there or things that aren't understood correctly that we need to change. Same with curriculum, and same with standards.
Yeah. Well, I think you make an excellent point, because we do, in conversation, especially here on True to Q, there'll be a conversation and then somebody will post a journal article or reference something somebody said, and it could be 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. And what we really try and make sure everyone is aware of is the fact that things change. And so something that was in print and could have been somebody's opinion, 7 years ago, may not actually support the way things are intended to be used now. So we want the most current.
Sure. And if we have, it's obviously we have a lot of misunderstanding about this issue that we're talking about today, or a couple of issues that we're talking about today. So it's not surprising to me that there's a little bit of misinformation out there, because some of the misunderstanding is widespread, even among our own ranks.
Okay. Oh, and this, I think someone's pointing one out, so I'll make sure I send you this. On Protocol 31, they say Appendix A, that must be additional information. They describe the report of unconsciousness, fainting, or near fainting, or decreased consciousness in a patient who is breathing effectively. That addition of decreased consciousness, I think, is one of the points of confusion.
Right. And that's taking that complaint in a complete vacuum. And right. I know nothing else about that complaint. But if there was nothing else to the complaint other than the patient is less conscious than they normally are, and this is different behavior for them, then I think that's perfectly appropriate to go to 31 in a case like that. Perfectly appropriate. But that doesn't mean that, if you're calling for a cancer patient who's lethargic, who's taking a bunch of medications, that 31 is the best place for you.
Right.
Right. If they attribute that directly to she took too much of this narcotic, then I'm fine with 23. If she's just been in so much pain and, we can't manage her at home now we're looking at 26. Right. So give me the rest of the chief complaint.
So I think what you just said is really helpful. That's kind of our tweetable thing there. It's if it's decreased level of consciousness with nothing else to explain why they have a decreased level of consciousness, 31's your thing. But say your grandma has a decreased level of consciousness and she's diabetic and we think her sugar's low, we have another Protocol 13 that's going to address both that issue with the sugar and the primary symptom of unconscious or decreased level of consciousness.
Exactly. If she's having clear stroke-like, unilateral stroke-like symptoms, you belong on 28. If she's bleeding out and she's got a decreased level of consciousness, well, maybe 21. There's a whole host of different protocols depending on what that chief complaint description is. And I think it's not asking too much of EMDs to understand which protocols deal with that symptom. It's almost all of them, trauma or not, deal with the not alert condition.
Well, I think if they feel like they have permission to consider those, because I do think people think that there has been that prevalent misunderstanding that if I hear anything decreased level of consciousness is 31. So even now as they do that, it might be a challenge for them. They may have to get back into the protocol and look, which of these has a question about, is he completely alert? And that will be something that would be a great CDE or refreshers for an agency to do, to have them pay attention to where they find those complaints or those descriptions.
I can't think of a protocol. I guess there's a couple of protocols that deal with the scene rather than the individual.
Or even 29, if there's an indication it asks about it. 8, right. I think that, it's everywhere. So if we know that, we have more information to do that. Someone did say, because I think people are always looking to different levels of a level of consciousness. I'm lightheaded. I'm calling because I'm sitting here and I'm so lightheaded I can't stand up.
Yeah, okay. That's a chief complaint encapsulated. That's 31. They're feeling like they're going to pass out. Then they're concerned enough about it to call. The only distinction I think the protocol clearly makes about that is we try to make a distinction between vertigo or dizziness, feeling of loss of balance, versus fainting or near fainting. And vertigo, and we kind of draw the line at if it causes a fall, you probably should go to 31. Right. If they say they're dizzy and he fell, you're probably talking more about near fainting than you are loss of coordination. But it's really a guess at that point, and it's important to get the whole rest of the chief complaint to help you get where you want to go.
Right. So if they say I'm really lightheaded or I'm really dizzy, I understand we're going to get you help. Tell me exactly what's happening. Right. And get them to tell you more of a story.
Sure. Because
I think that's where people get worried too. And I think it's that trigger finger that you talked about. And one of the other reasons I think that happens is people feel pressure to choose a chief complaint. They need to get through it quickly. But I think if you get it through so quickly that you make a mistake, it doesn't help that you got through it quickly.
Dr. Clausen jokingly says if he had this whole thing to do over again, could rewrite case entry, the one change he'd make is in that very important question, tell me exactly what happened. He would precede that. He'd say, tell me exactly what happened. I've got all the time in the world. And I think if we had something like that, or at least if our attitude was like that, and it's not always the EMD's fault. We have standards that say, 90% of the time you need to be on this chief complaint process needs to take X amount of time, not even considering what the address and phone verification takes. Right. When in reality, all those little processes need to be measured on their own, see how we can improve. Mm-hmm. But, let's do a really good job. Let's not get through it really fast only to get it wrong.
So key takeaway is, as much as you can, take your time, be welcome to ask clarifying questions to figure out, I'm looking in your article, because you also had another great way that you said that.
Well, I think if you really understand what's happening at the scene or what the chief complaint is, the decision about what that chief complaint is and what protocol will best address it will be easier for you.
The more information, the easier.
The more information you have, the more obvious it's going to be where you need to go.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think you said, in other words, the trained EMD must listen carefully and clarify when necessary the answer to the case entry question 3, then use that information both clinically and circumstantially to formulate an accurate chief complaint. So that's a lot more than what the caller told you that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons, in fact, the only reason that we changed our term to description, meaning that's the caller, that's what the caller's telling you. Mm-hmm. It's up to you to figure out what that chief complaint is. And once you have that chief complaint, then you need to know which protocol to select based on your knowledge of those protocols and what they're addressing.
Excellent. Well, we're at an hour, Brett.
Wow, that's great.
And I will let everybody know if you're actually watching this and it's not live, if you do have any questions, you're very welcome to post them. If you just do @KimRB when you ask the question, it will alert me so I'll know the questions there. So I'll make sure that I get any that Brett needs to see so he can answer the questions from this day. And I'm going to request if anybody has any more questions, anybody has any comments, things they would like to know about, post them now. But you've gotten a bunch of thumbs up too. Yeah, the circumstances also need to be taken into account, not just what the caller says. People really like that.
I think if we allow EMDs to do this, they'll do a really good job. But we have to allow them to do it. We can't stand behind them with a stick and wait for them to screw up. We gotta educate and let them think. And if they choose the wrong one, let's figure out why and what would be best for the patient, and not always rely on the rules.
Exactly. And I just had a conversation with someone this morning talking about, if they choose what appears to be the wrong chief complaint, but you can see what happened and why, and you can have a conversation with them about it. I mean, it isn't black and white where this is right and this is wrong. Sometimes there's a best chief complaint, but the other one still works. So you can have a conversation about, in the future, this other chief complaint will work much better. If you go to 13 instead of 31, you see there's less questions. They make more sense for the presentation of the call, and you can move forward. But that doesn't mean that every single time they have to get smacked down and been told their chief complaint is wrong. It just might be better to use a different one. And I think if we do that more, and we're reassured as Qs that we can do that,
right,
that will be that softer, gentler conversation instead of now you have a non-compliant call because you chose the wrong chief complaint.
Right, exactly. And there are many times I think where two protocols will work, and we need to be open to that.
Yeah, it was designed that way, wasn't it? There's some redundancy. If you choose one, it'll get you the same level and kind of response as another.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm just going to see if we have. Oh, Lori said educate and empower. And now it's just a whole bunch of thank you. So nobody has any questions at this point. Just you can read after this, Brett. You can read all of the comments. But thank you so much. I have learned so much about this. I always find anytime I ask you a question, I am learning something that I didn't know. So I feel a lot clearer in this particular area, especially the 26 versus 31. If people have more questions, post them here. We'll make sure that they get answered. Do you have any final thing you want to say to wrap this up?
No, I just want to thank, I think we had at one point 31 people show up to hear us talk today. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, that's great. And hope to see you all at Navigator.
And I think we're going to share this a little broader as well, because there's been so much request for it. And you'll see, Brett, because it's noon for us, but it's 9 o'clock in Pacific and it's 7 o'clock where James, or 5 o'clock where James is, and in UK it's after hours. We get lots of views after it's live, so it'll go up quite a bit. So we'll see, I'll monitor and see what the discussion's like. And we're going to, because this group is a private Facebook group only for Qs, we're going to look and see what we can do to just share it if other people have the same question. Because we're talking to the Qs on how to score it, but we're not addressing the EMDs who actually have to do it as broadly. So we'll figure that out.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, everyone who joined us today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you are. Bye-bye. Thanks, Brett.
Bye-bye.